Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning to those joining us from the West. And thank you all for joining us for CCS Fundraising's Perspectives on Philanthropy webinar, marking today's release of the Giving USA 2025 data. My name is Eric Javier, and I am a principal and managing director here at CCS Fundraising. CCS is a fundraising solutions firm that has partnered with nonprofit organizations for nearly 80 years to help them achieve transformational change. We are honored to support institutions across every sector and region, and we are thrilled to have so many of you with us today, representing nonprofits of all sizes, missions, and areas of impact. On behalf of all of us at CCS, I would like to begin by expressing our sincere gratitude for the work that each of you does to strengthen communities, drive social change, and inspire generosity. In many ways, you are all in the business of hope. It is the energy, commitment, and creativity you bring to this work that gives us hope in our collective future. We at CCS are also proud to continue our long-standing collaboration with the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, the nation's leading academic institution dedicated to advancing the study of philanthropy and the source of the Giving USA report's data and research. We are honored to have as our keynote speaker, Dr. Una Osili, Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at the Lilly Family School. An internationally recognized economist and philanthropy expert, Dr. Osili leads the research and publication of Giving USA and provides insights that shape how the field understands giving trends both nationally and globally. This morning, the latest Giving USA data was officially released, and you are among the first to receive this year's top-line findings. While the giving landscape remains complex, the report offers timely insight that can inform strategy and spark meaningful conversations across the industry. At CCS, we see firsthand how organizations across the country use this data to guide planning, deepen donor engagement, and drive fundraising outcomes, and we are proud to support so many of them in that work. Following Dr. Osili's keynote, we will turn to a distinguished panel of philanthropic leaders who will reflect on the data and share how their institutions are navigating the current moment. We are pleased to have with us today Tim McMahon, Vice President for University Advancement at Marquette University, and Emily Church, Chief Impact Officer at the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute. Our panel moderator, my colleague, Polly Breit, will tell you more about Tim and Emily in the latter half of today's program. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded, and both the recording and presentation slides will be shared with you after the event. We encourage you to submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature in Zoom. We will answer as many questions as we can in the chat, and we'll be posting a robust FAQ after today's program to answer any questions we may not get to during the program. Thank you again for joining us. It is now my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Una Osili, to take us through the latest data. Dr. Osili.
Well, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure and a delight to join all of you from all over the country. This is really an exciting time where we get to share the latest results. You are among the first anywhere in the world to hear about the current state of giving and think about its implications for all of our practices. Giving USA, as all of you know, is the longest running report. It's also the most comprehensive report on charitable giving. And we're really honored to partner with CCS. I want to thank our CCS colleagues for hosting this webinar, but also our larger Giving USA community, and especially my colleagues at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, including John Bergdahl, Christina Daniken, and Siobhan Shetra, who are part of the amazing team that bring this data. Today's report comes at a very momentous time for the United States and the world. We look around us, there's a lot of uncertainty, volatility, and a lot of change taking place, whether it's at a geopolitical level or even within the economic sphere. one phrase that has kept me certainly grounded and optimistic throughout this time is reflecting back at another moment in our history. Then Senator Kennedy, who later became President Kennedy, talked about a Chinese word that could actually mean two things. It means two things. One, danger. It's the word for crisis in Chinese, but it means both danger and opportunity. So we do live in a time of crisis, but in that crisis, we also have to be, of course, custodians of hope and also able to see the opportunities even in these moments of change. We are at such a moment, and I'm so pleased to share the latest findings for Giving USA. Each of the data points that you'll hear about today reflect the generosity of Americans of all different backgrounds, individuals, foundations, bequests, charitable bequests, and also corporations. And as I have had the really blessing of working on this project for quite some time now, I've been able to see why this data matters. And I want to encourage all of you who've joined us today to think of this as a time of opportunity as well as challenge, and to bring this message of generosity and the resilience of the American philanthropic sector to your leadership roles in your organizations and in your own communities. So let's start with the very big picture, the top line results that you have been waiting for, and certainly our team has been working on really year round, is to share the big picture. The big picture this year is certainly one of encouragement and opportunity. So let's go to the very first slide. The main results, the key takeaway for Giving USA 2025. As you know, Giving USA shares information about the prior year. And we see in the data that charitable giving reached $592.5 billion in 2024. This is especially significant because when we look at these dollars, at least in current terms, we see that last year's record, Giving USA 2025, showing 2024 data, giving actually reached a new level of $592 billion. It's not quite the best year on record because, as you know, there was an increase in generosity during the pandemic, and 2021 still remains the best year of giving on record. These data can set an important baseline going into an increasingly uncertain landscape and can be a reminder to all of us as we navigate this new and changing environment that Americans are generous. They've been generous during tough times, during times of economic volatility, and they've also been very generous even in very prosperous times. So taken together, this is certainly a very encouraging set of results as we navigate an increasingly volatile environment. Now let's go to the next slide. You, of course, are familiar, many of you, with the Giving USA pie chart. When we look back at this data, it's really quite also important to recognize where all the giving comes from and to be reminded that the bulk, the lion's share of American philanthropy comes from individuals. Said differently, individuals are the cornerstone of American philanthropy, making up about 66% of all giving. This is also worth noting because when we dig into this data, into the individual segment, we recognize that Americans increasingly cover different age groups, race, ethnicity, religious affiliation, live in, of course, urban and rural settings. And one point that we make continuously is that we're living in a time of demographic shifts. Americans, of course, lots of diversity, but also as it concerns age, we have a growing population of older Americans who are reaching their peak giving years. And I just want to highlight that as an area of opportunity for the philanthropic sector, that planned gifts, legacy gifts are going to be important in this era. In addition, we have a growing number of young people who are reaching, of course, the age where they start to set up stable economic lives and are able to set down roots and start to think about their philanthropic commitments. So this individual segment emphasizes the importance of engaging with individuals and the power of individuals to change their communities. In addition, where we look at this pie chart, especially over time, another data point that stands out is the role that foundations play. Today, nearly 1 out of every 5 charitable dollars comes from a foundation. Foundations, of course, cover quite a wide array of organizational types. We have smaller family foundations where decision-making is typically made by one or two individuals. Our family members comprise of board members, but increasingly professionally staffed foundations make up this landscape. As we look at what's happened in the foundation segment, especially during the pandemic era, foundations played a key role in innovating. Many of them introduced more unrestricted grant making, flexible grant making, and some even increased their payout rates. Looking ahead, we're already seeing foundations continue to play a role in experimentation, expanding their commitments in their communities, and thinking about new ways of meeting their mission. I want to mention briefly corporate giving because today corporate giving makes up 7% of the landscape. That's a slight increase from what we've seen in previous years. Corporations have benefited from the strength of financial markets as well as strong performance by a lot of corporations when we look at pre-tax profits. And then finally, charitable bequests, a segment that as we think about the landscape and the future, opportunities certainly unfold when we think about charitable bequests. Today, that makes up about 8% of charitable giving, but projected with our rising population of older Americans, that charitable bequests are poised to continue to grow as a part of the philanthropic sector. Now, let's go to the next slide and talk about the destination of charitable giving. To many who have studied this landscape for some time, it comes as no surprise that religious congregations still make up the largest slice of American philanthropy. One way to think about this is religious congregations form a central part of American philanthropy. However, this segment has actually declined over time. In the 50s and 60s, religious congregations made up 2/3 of American philanthropy. You can see that that segment that goes to congregations has declined over time. However, faith still plays a central role in American philanthropy. Many Americans give to other sectors because of their religious traditions and faith and values. And we see the footprint of religious congregations in other segments, whether it's human services, education, or even the environment and the arts. For our team, we have been following very closely what's taking place in the philanthropic sector. And I just want to mention that human services has now taken the #2 spot as a destination for charitable giving, making up about 14% of charitable giving. During the pandemic, many Americans prioritized giving to basic needs charities, given the food insecurity, housing needs, and many other associated basic needs during that period. Education is quite close in terms of the dollars that it represents, but it's now the 3rd largest subsector. And then finally, 2 subsectors that I want to highlight because there are newer entrants to the American philanthropic sphere that include giving to the environment and also giving to international causes. The last few years have been a time of growth for international organizations, specifically with the war in Ukraine, where there has been an uptick in humanitarian support. Of course, lots of change taking place in the international arena, both from a geopolitical lens, but also with many governments shifting their aid priorities. And this is looking ahead. But there is, of course, when we think about the environmental sector, also an opportunity to engage younger Americans. Many of them place a lot of emphasis on supporting environmental causes and also animals. So taken together, when we look at this map, there is, of course, lots of change taking place in the philanthropic sector, but also an opportunity to engage new donors, retain and engage current donors, and also think about how to innovate to meet the needs of future donors. So this is really both a description of where we are in philanthropy, but also where we're headed. To the next slide. As we think about total giving, I just want to pause by saying, where are we in the philanthropic sector? How did we get here? And also, what can we expect going forward? We have taken the time to actually highlight the recession years in yellow. And the reason for that is that there's been a lot of talk in the last few years about whether the US is heading for a recession, emerging towards one, or perhaps we should be preparing for one. And here, I just want to emphasize that each recession is different in its impact on giving. I would actually go as far as to say you've seen one recession. The biggest impact we saw in philanthropy was during the Great Recession, where giving declined by about 14%. And it did take 6 to 7 years for giving to recover. However, we've had recession years where giving was unaffected. In the 1980s, for example, where the stock market crash and all of the other associated economic shocks did not have a negative impact on giving. And more recently, 2020 was a recession year, the year of the COVID pandemic. By year end, we saw that financial markets had rebounded and giving started to recover. In fact, the next year was a peak year for giving. So I want to offer this data as a way of encouraging many of you who are joining as a reminder that Americans give, that giving is a central part of many communities, and that giving is resilient in the face of shocks. And that this particular impact of a recession on giving depends on the type of recession, the nature of the recession, how long it lasts, but that we don't necessarily have to change our mission or approach because at the end of the day, the important thing is to understand that our job is to stay committed to our mission and also to engage with our donors, whether or not things are uncertain or whether there's more or less volatility. Now, moving to the next slide. Many of you may be wondering, what is the main explanation for the record levels that we're seeing in giving over the last few years specifically? Total giving in this past year's Giving USA was actually supported by a strong economy. Overall, financial markets had a stellar year. I'd go as far as to say that. And that's because across a number of indices that we track, we saw stock markets growing at about 20%, even adjusted for inflation. That had positive implications for individual giving as well as corporate giving. In fact, we see across the board that a strong financial market performance really helped with individual giving growth as well as corporate giving growth. But even if we were to zoom out and look across other measures of economic performance, overall, the US economy did actually avert a recession last year, and we had a strong growth overall with unemployment being quite low. We did see growth, overall GDP growth being roughly close to 2-3%. And then one other factor that has been a big headline for the last few years, inflation. Inflation, while not yet at pre-pandemic levels, stabilized in 2024. You could say moderated in 2024, which had a positive impact overall on giving. So I just want to end this big picture component by emphasizing that these new levels of giving should give us all some reassurance, especially as we head into the new period, the new era of more uncertainty and volatility. Now, moving to the next slide. Our team works very hard at this period every year, June, usually this last Tuesday in June, not just to navigate the key data points, but also the whys behind the giving rates. In addition, Giving USA provides this long-run perspective, not just on where we are currently, but where we've been as a philanthropic sector. And this is also something that I want to share with everyone who's joined. When we look back, we see a story of growth. American philanthropy has certainly expanded over the last few decades, and on average has grown at about 3% a year. And so when we look at this current period's results, it's very encouraging to see that we have kind of kept up with the long run average for Giving USA. The key explanations, as you reflect on these findings, there are probably three things that I would lift up. The first one, strong financial markets in 2024, a solid overall economy, but also a sense of financial and economic security in 2024. Donors tend to give when they feel financially and economically secure, and we did have those conditions in 2024. Having said that, I know that there's certainly a lot of other forces at play. We know that while high net worth households may have enjoyed strong balance sheets, growth in their financial market portfolios, everyday households may be more hard hit by the higher than average inflation numbers that we all have been discussing. And so it's quite important to note that even in these aggregate data that are showing growth, there are real concerns about how Americans are giving. Now let's move to the next slide. And this is probably, of all the results, the one that I have spent a lot of time thinking about and what this means. In the results for Giving USA, we've seen a very familiar pattern that individuals remain the large majority of American giving. They are central to American giving. I want to emphasize that because this is an era where we're also recognizing that trust plays a critical role in philanthropy. People give to organizations, to leadership, to institutions that they trust. And one of the stories of the success of American philanthropy is the trust that Americans have in the institutions that they support, especially in this era where there is a great deal of polarization and lower trust in institutions. It's important to recognize that for philanthropy to continue to grow and thrive in the future, we as a sector have to continue to build that trust. And here, I think it's important to note that when we look across the map of philanthropy now and in the future, individuals will continue to play a big role. One way to think about this and the importance of individuals is to highlight that the foundation segment is actually made up of roughly half of that sector is made up of family foundations. So if we were to add up individuals, half of family foundations and charitable bequests, we would have something like 85% or so of giving attributed to individuals. The takeaway for all of you that are joining is this is the time to engage with individuals. It's harder to do that with so many new technologies and ways of building relationships, but emphasizing that individuals will continue to play a critical role going forward. In addition, we did see another bright spot in this year's Giving USA report, and that's the role of corporate giving. Corporate giving is now 7% of total giving. It's still the smallest share, but it has actually also been supported by strong financial markets and strong, particularly corporate pre-tax profits. And so this is also a time to think about how to engage corporate donors, especially those that have benefited from a strong financial market performance. Now let's go to the next slide. And I want to highlight both an opportunity and a challenge, staying with our theme for this year's presentation. As we look at the growth of giving over time, there is one data point that actually has stayed relatively stable, and that's the share of giving from disposable income. In other words, what fraction of income do Americans allocate to their giving? And you can see that despite the growth of giving over time, it has stayed about 2% of household budgets. And so if I were to issue a call to action to all of you who joined us today, it is, what could we do differently in the philanthropic sector to move the needle on this 2%? Is there a role for public policy? Is there a role for individual fundraisers and nonprofit leaders to inspire more donors to allocate more to giving? And is there a role for all of us as members of a community to emphasize the importance of charitable giving and share this norm more generally, especially with our younger members of our workplaces and our community and even our families? So I will just share that this is a data point we spend a lot of time on at the Lilly Family School and thinking about what it would take to move the needle on this 2%. Now, going to the next slide. Individuals will continue to be a theme. As you can see, we have probably spent the most time on that in this webinar, but that's also because individuals are not just the largest slice, but this year they actually grew the most at 8.2% in current dollars and adjusted for inflation about 5%. So this is a chance to talk about what is going on with individual giving. Specifically, we've seen over the last few years the rise of large gifts. Many organizations announce those large-scale commitments, and growth in the overall economy, especially in financial markets, led to more giving, especially from high net worth individuals. But across the board, we did see an uptick in consumer confidence in 2024, although there still remains a lot of concern if you drill down into that data. Where I would say there are opportunities to grow individual giving is once again prioritizing building trust, also thinking about younger Americans and how to engage them in philanthropy as we think about building the next generation of donors. And finally, it's important to recognize that Americans increasingly come from all different backgrounds, and nonprofits, as they seek to build relationships with those donors, need to also connect with those individuals, understanding that one size doesn't fit all anymore in this environment, and meeting donors where they are, understanding their motivations, their barriers to giving, and their constraints to giving matters more than ever. And so let's go to the next finding, and we're moving through this to another area where we have been allocating quite a bit of time. And that's because for the last few years, we've seen giving by foundations reach and exceed the $100 billion mark. This is especially worth noting because if you look back at earlier versions of Giving USA, you'll note that the amounts given by foundations were much smaller. What we've noticed over the last few years is that a strong financial market performance has led to elevated levels of foundation giving. But it's not just the amounts that are being given that are worth paying attention to, it's also how foundations are giving. During the pandemic, many foundations introduced more unrestricted forms of giving, flexible grant making. Some increased their payout rates. And unlike government and perhaps large corporations, foundations can be more flexible in their decision making if their boards decide to make different policies and decisions. And so as we think about how to engage with foundations, it's also worth noting that foundations are quite varied in their approaches. Many of them do have strong partnerships with the nonprofits that they support, and for organizations who are working closely with foundations to also understand where those foundations are with their priorities and their decision making. Now going to the next slide, corporations. For a long time, we have noted that corporate giving has stayed relatively stable at about 5-6% of charitable giving. And that was true in the 50s and 60s. It's also true now. We did see a slight uptick in the share of corporate giving in the overall philanthropic sector. And that can be largely explained by one, financial markets, and two, the strong overall economic environment. Many corporations, like their individual counterparts, are allocating more to the philanthropic bucket when they experience more positive economic conditions. In addition, we're seeing corporations adopt a more strategic approach in their giving, especially when we compare this with where they've been in the past, and increasingly expand beyond just the philanthropy charitable sector. In other words, many corporations are innovating by allocating impact investment dollars. Some of them are building marketing and strategic partnerships with nonprofits that go outside of a pure philanthropy approach. And finally, workplace giving is being reimagined for this new environment where many workers are remote and companies are also using contingent workers. So there is quite a bit going on in the corporate space. In the past, corporations did have matching dollars. Today, they're not just matching dollars, but sometimes matching volunteer hours. It's important to recognize that corporations are also thinking about how they adapt to a changing political, economic, and social environment. But there are many different avenues to engage with corporations, the traditional philanthropic approach, but also the marketing approach, and increasingly through the workplace arena, workplace giving umbrella. Now going to the next slide. Here is another chart that could be a call to action alongside the individual giving one. Looking back at Giving USA, you can see that corporate giving used to be a much higher fraction of pre-tax profits. It went up quite a bit in the 90s and has come back down in the most recent period, actually going below 1% for part of the 2000s. More recently, we've seen an uptick in the share of corporate giving in pre-tax profits. And there's also here another opportunity to engage corporations and partner with them to allocate more towards a charity. We can do this as consumers for the companies we support, but we can also do this as nonprofit leaders and fundraisers to really think about creatively how to work with corporations. When we share this data with many of our corporate peers, we do get some pushback from time to time where corporations say, well, we are giving a lot more that's outside of the pure corporate giving bucket. But there's certainly a lot of opportunity to raise awareness about opportunities for corporations to invest in the nonprofits in their own communities. Now going to the next slide, as we close out this section of the presentation, we're going to shift gears in the top 10 findings to talk about where the largest dollars are going to and where the opportunities are as we look ahead. Now, when we look at the map of giving, the Giving USA pie charts are so well known within the sector. It's worth noting that the destinations that are receiving charitable dollars have actually shifted over time. Religious congregations, as I noted, are still the largest destination of charitable dollars, but you can see that that segment has declined significantly over time. It's also worth noting that human services has now taken the lead at number 2, as we've noted, and educational institutions, looking back, used to be mostly about giving to higher education, but today a range of educational institutions receive support, including after-school programs, and even K through 12 organizations are part of that education map. Looking ahead, what we have seen in the most recent Giving USA report is that organizations that have innovated and are adapting to this new environment are the ones that are well positioned to be successful. In addition, a big theme that comes out of this year's report is the importance of diversification. With so much uncertainty and change, there's certainly an opportunity for organizations to think about all the different sources of funding that are available to them and to position themselves to adapt to this shifting environment. And so let's go to the next slide. As we reflect on the last few years, one common theme has been uncertainty. The COVID pandemic was characterized by a great deal of uncertainty, a lot of unpredictability, and we learned how to use that word very often, the word unprecedented, but also the word pivot. Many organizations had to learn new ways of delivering on their mission, but also new ways of engaging with donors and stakeholders. In particular, what we saw during the pandemic, many nonprofits that had relied on sort of traditional ways of fundraising and engaging with donors had to make the biggest shifts. Some of the sectors that were particularly hard hit included the arts subsector and even healthcare, where they had a lot of in-person events and fundraising. The good news in this year's report is that we've seen a broad-based recovery. Many of the health and arts organizations that really took some setbacks during the pandemic have recovered and are actually reaching new levels when adjusted for inflation. In particular, when we look at public society benefit, that's the subsector that includes umbrella organizations like United Ways, United Jewish Appeals, and the international and education sector all experienced double-digit growth in current dollars. The strength of their recovery has a lot to do with the fact that they had weaker years last year in particular, and that there's been some recovery as a stronger economy has led to donors increasing their giving, as well as this is a time to highlight that many organizations have made significant shifts in their outreach to donors, their engagement to donors, and retaining current donors. And all of that is starting to show up in these results. The ninth finding of the top 10 on the next slide is that we have seen, as we look across all the subsectors that we study, that many of our subsectors grew in 2024, even after adjusting for inflation. This is worth noting because it means that across the board, we do show, one, a healthy nonprofit sector, and two, a resilient, healthy subsector, subsectors that have been able to rebound from a series of economic shocks. I think it's worth emphasizing that given the current environment in 2025, the fact that many organizations are entering into this period with a healthy set of reserves, in some cases, healthy balance sheets, and also increased adaptation and ability to navigate more turbulent environments. And finally, as we close out the presentation on the next slide, I also want to share another data point that has really kept our attention here at the Lilly Family School, and that's the share of giving that's taking place online. We've been tracking this for quite some time. You can see that online giving has been growing very steadily, but during the pandemic, we had an inflection point where online giving is now over 10% of overall giving, with so much attention being placed on AI, large language models, using artificial intelligence, both from a fundraising standpoint, donor cultivation, donor relationships, grant writing, and so many other ways. There's also a question of how does the field continue to build trust with donors while embracing some of the benefits of these new technologies. I just want to summarize by saying, as we reflect on the results for Giving USA 2025, we are filled with both, of course, hope and optimism, but also an understanding that to be successful in this new world that we are all navigating, nonprofit leaders, fundraisers, donors, board members will have to embrace this both sense of what are the challenges out there, but also what are the opportunities. And remember that the nonprofit sector is still the subsector, the part of our economy that consumers report the highest trust in. And so we have to remain custodians of hope, and also reminders to everyone else that philanthropy is a place where they can put those dollars in, they can be trusted, the institutions can be trusted, and we are part of creating and delivering on our mission. So I will stop here, turn it back over to our moderator, and thank you once again for joining us today.
Dr. Osili, thank you so much for sharing the 2024 philanthropic data and trends with us. I'm Polly Breit, and I help lead CCS's work in the Mountain West out of our Colorado office. We are living in an increasingly complex period, and it's encouraging that American philanthropy remains resilient and strong as people turn to nonprofits they trust to address the issues and ideas that are most important to them. Today is a significant day for the nonprofit community as we come together to celebrate, reflect, and plan. We understand the immense effort that goes into bringing this valuable resource to the sector. So on behalf of all of us joining today, a heartfelt thank you to you and your team at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We certainly have much to discuss, and I'm pleased to reintroduce our two esteemed panelists who are joining us from across the philanthropic community to share how these findings play out in their work and inform their strategy. In introducing them, our aim is to provide an overview of the experiences and accomplishments that shape the perspectives they will share today. Please join me in welcoming Emily Church, who is the Chief Impact Officer for Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, where she leads strategy, philanthropy, and communications to advance equitable access to high-quality mental health care. Emily brings over 20 years of experience in fundraising, marketing, and communications, with a remarkable track record in securing transformational gifts and leading campaigns. Prior to joining the Meadows Institute, she held senior development roles at Texas Children's Hospital, where she led a $100 million neuroscience initiative, and at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, where she directed a $450 million capital campaign. Emily's background also includes strategic business development work at top advertising firms. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. Tim McMahon is Vice President for University Advancement at Marquette University, where he leads a team of over 100 professionals to foster a university-wide culture of giving. Under Tim's leadership, Marquette has raised more than $801 million through its historic Time to Rise campaign, surpassing its goal and engaging nearly 72,000 donors, over half of whom were first-time givers. The campaign has driven growth in alumni participation, supported transformational campus projects, and advanced key priorities, including scholarships, student success, and faculty research. With more than 20 years of advancement experience at institutions like Villanova, Hofstra, and Fordham, Tim is known for his collaborative leadership style and commitment to strategic, mission-driven philanthropy. Tim, we're delighted to have you with us today. Thanks for being here. To get us started, I have a two-part question focused on the broader data. And Emily, I'd love to start with you. This year's Giving USA report has once again provided us with a wealth of insight. Are there any data points or trends that stand out to you as surprising or confirming what you're observing in the field? Additionally, how might you integrate these insights into your planning and operations?
Thank you so much, Polly, and thank you for inviting me to join this panel today. I would say that the Giving USA report is always a valuable anchor, right? It offers clear data on who gave, how much, and to which sectors. And certainly this year's growth with individuals and foundations still providing the lion's share of giving certainly aligns with our experience at the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, as does the modest uptick in corporate giving. That said, the lines between individual and foundation giving are really beginning to blur, at least in our experience, right? So individuals are becoming more sophisticated. They're seeking metrics, theories of change, and system-level strategies that once we really felt were limited to institutional funders. And meanwhile, foundations are becoming a little bit more like individuals. Some are really leaning into trust-based philanthropy, and others are really requiring that sort of cultivation and donor engagement and relationship mapping that we kind of typically think of residing in the individual world. And so I say that because over the past 40 years, we've seen individual giving go down and foundation giving double. But in practice and from a strategic perspective, I actually think that distinction is perhaps not as useful as it once was, right? Our engagement strategies are going to be pretty much the same.
That's fantastic insight, and I imagine helpful to so many on the call today. Thanks, Emily. Tim, how about you?
Sure. Well, thanks again, Polly, for having me on this panel. It's great to be with everybody today. And when I think of the Giving USA data, it really is encouraging to see the broad-based sector of philanthropy grow year over year. Particularly what I look at is the individual giving, and to see that up 8% is also encouraging. And specifically in the education world, to see that be 14%, but also a year over year growth of about 13%. That's really helpful context. I think what Una also outlined is how can we continue to use that data to see where are the opportunities to collaborate further. When it does go back to Marquette and our day-to-day, we use that data and that context to really think strategically, use the data to be more informed. And for me, it comes down to about three things as I was thinking about this topic and this data. One is just making sure that we use this as an opportunity to underline why we believe in the missions we serve. I believe in the transformational power of education. That's why I pursued this career, and making sure that as we're seeking philanthropic support in this very competitive landscape. It's growing, but there's many sectors that are deserving, many philanthropic missions that are competing for dollars. How can we make sure that we're telling the story as impactful as we can? Yes, we want to earn trust, and we want to be able to tell and make the case that's compelling enough to show impact, both before, during, and after the gift is made. So making sure that we double down on our belief and our storytelling. And then I think a lot of the data is informative, and then we have to bring it out into the field and really work in a donor-centered environment to see what are our strategic priorities and what are the donors interested in, and really understand what they're feeling, what they're seeing, and walk with them on the journey, not just on the way to the gift and right after, but how do we then, which is my third point, how do we then engage them in more meaningful ways in our volunteer ecosystem? So at Marquette, we've been able to do that over the course of the campaign, not just in the campaign executive committee, but in the schools and colleges and with various programs. And so how can we really think about these things in a strategic way, but then apply it to Marquette and keep growing as best we can?
That's fantastic. Tim, I think that highlights your commitment to strategic mission-driven philanthropy that we've heard about.
Yes.
Dr. Osili, this year's total giving reached $592.5 billion, up 6.3% in current dollars and 3.3% when adjusted for inflation. 4 subsectors, education, health, arts, and environment, reached all-time highs. You have a unique vantage point having led this research. Do you see this year's growth as broad-based or concentrated? And how are you advising nonprofit partners to interpret the macro level increase in giving?
Yes, thank you once again for, of course, convening all of us. This year's report, I think, really helps us go back to what drives giving. I would say that the results suggest a broad-based nature of the recovery, but also recognizing that organizations have navigated quite a few shocks over the last few years. The advice I would give would probably be threefold. The first one, I think I mentioned this already, but it starts with trust and relationships, sort of that old-fashioned engaging with donors. Individuals are still the lion's share of American philanthropy, but also recognizing within those individual donors, there is a lot of diversity by age, by race and ethnicity, gender, understanding all of those donors. The second piece of advice in an uncertain landscape is diversification. The Giving USA pie chart reminds us that we have, of course, individuals, but also foundations and charitable bequests, planned giving, as well as the third, corporate giving. So understanding how you partner with all of those different types of donors and recognizing that those donors are, we call it, this is the era of rising expectations. Donors are expecting more from the nonprofits that they support. And finally, the third piece is looking ahead. When we think about the future of philanthropy, of course, technology is going to play a role, but also the importance of innovation. How do we adapt to this changing environment? And especially where it relates to bringing the next generation of donors into philanthropy. So those are the sort of 3 highlights that the data really points us to.
Dr. Osili, thank you for that rich perspective. As we understand how to interpret that data, it makes me think of a chair of a campaign we worked with in Wyoming. And in her first cabinet meeting, she said, I've learned one thing. This is my 5th or 6th campaign that I've chaired, and it's that fundraising moves at the speed of trust. And that really resonated as you walked us through the data. I'd love to explore your observations and experiences as it relates to donor behavior and giving by source. So you shared that giving by individuals rose 8.2%, the strongest growth we've seen since 2021. At the same time, corporate giving hit an all-time high in inflation-adjusted dollars. But bequest giving declined and foundation giving remained flat. Emily, I'd love to start with you. In your role at Meadows Institute, how are you interpreting this resurgence in individual and corporate giving? And what donor behaviors are you watching closely?
Yeah, so I mean, I think as I mentioned before, I sort of see the rise and fall of foundation individuals as sort of combined in one, right? So kind of more interested in looking at what and how the donors are giving who are. In terms of donors are increasingly coming to us and saying they don't necessarily want to be investing in short-term fixes, right? Ones that are reliant on ongoing philanthropy. They want to invest in sustainable solutions that can change how systems operate so that they can get out of the picture, right? Exit stage left. And so we're seeing that shift and a lot of the larger gifts that we're getting and others in our state and field, and that mega gifts are no longer really being limited to those big capital investments, a new wing on a hospital, a new building on campus. But are increasingly being directed towards research and innovation and programs with lasting scalable impact. So I'd say donors are being drawn to programs that have direct, immediate impact on lives, as well as programs and initiatives that are deliberately including pathways to scale, and whether that includes bringing in public funding or private sector resources, again, using philanthropy to see these larger system-changing things. I would say one really good example that we had at Meadows Institute is probably our single largest gift was from Maureen Hackett in Houston, who established the Hackett Center for Mental Health with the idea that this was not a building. This was a place to have an endowed center that would continue to bring the resources of the larger institute into her region that she cares about, with the idea of using policy to continue to scale and put that regional center on the national map. So again, I'm just really interested in sort of that shift into different types of giving.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. Those are powerful examples and highlight the power of philanthropy to affect systemic change and to have an immediate impact on people's lives. Tim, in higher education, alumni participation continues to challenge institutions nationally, yet you've bucked that trend. What strategies have contributed to your rise in participation and sustained major gift engagement? And what lessons might we be able to apply more broadly?
Sure. Well, thanks. When I arrived at Marquette, the annual giving percentage for alumni was about 13%, maybe 12.5%. And as I arrived, we were getting ready in the early stages of our Time to Rise campaign. Campaigns are a lot of things, and I still think there's tremendous value in comprehensive campaigns. But to me, one of the critical ingredients was to build a sustainable culture of giving. And I didn't think we could do that without moving the needle on our alumni giving. And so we really set about a bold goal to get to 20% by the end of the campaign of alumni giving. And that was really because we wanted to build something for the long term. The way that we went about doing that was a few ways. I mean, there's the why, and then there's the how. The why is the long-term focus, the culture of sustainable philanthropy on a college campus like Marquette, which has a very engaged alumni base around the world. But number two is really how, and that really became something that we talked about. We set a clear goal, we measured it. We really had a very public goal of getting to 20%. And we leaned in on all of our alumni, not just the longtime supporters. We leaned in on young alumni particularly. We saw over 100% increase in young alumni giving because we engaged them when we asked them to be one of the groups that really helped lead the way. And I also think that there's a power in having not just young alumni giving, but broad-based alumni giving. The most generous benefactors sometimes were so inspired that they weren't being called on to carry philanthropy forward forever, that there was a longer term horizon that we were pursuing. And so that's been really important. Our Give Marquette Day has been really successful each March. That really helps us drive a one-day celebration of philanthropy at Marquette where we get over 4,000 donors, over 5,000 donors each year. And then our digital giving had to really elevate. And so the digital elements of the way in which people give has really helped us capture timely information, make it very easy to give, but then also make it easy to amplify and share on social platforms this movement that that's taking place at Marquette. And I would say 20% is something that we're not looking to continue to grow, but maintain at this point. There is, I think, a diminishing returns, and it's a much longer conversation about alumni giving and what the number should be. For a place like Marquette, we really felt like 20% was a really strong metric, and it puts us about in the top 40 of all colleges and universities in the country. The last thing I'd say is it's not about any kind of rankings. It used to be part of 5%, I think, of the methodology of U.S. News and World Report. If it was 0%, we would have the same goal. It's about really having alumni drive our philanthropy at Marquette now and for the long term.
Wow. Congratulations to you and your team. That approach is truly, I don't use this word lightly, but transformational. Yeah. I imagine we will all pull ideas and inspiration from your success. As follow-up to that question, Tim, with donor retention increasingly difficult, how are you going about building that long-term loyalty through the campaign duration and beyond?
Sure. The campaign closed last June, so we're coming up on the first full year after the campaign. But one thing we're really proud of is our volunteer ecosystem. We certainly have a board of trustees, which has the governing role as officers of the university. But in the course of the campaign and in the course of driving towards getting this culture of giving elevated, we started councils like the President's Advisory Council. We had a number of campaign committees in all the schools and colleges, but also for annual giving, also for young alumni and for parents. We also have a gold standard Marquette Mentors program, which has hundreds of Marquette alumni matched with students one-to-one. And so the long story, and also I would be remiss if I didn't mention all the college leadership councils and the centers of excellence and institutes that have their own advisory councils. But the real point is how do we meaningfully engage alumni, parents, and friends in addition to the giving journey, but in their volunteer leadership role. And so I think that has really helped not just maintain retention and ongoing giving, it also helps attract new. Over 50% of our donors in Time to Rise were first-time donors, and that actually increases as you get to 6- and 7-figure donors. But I think having a really robust volunteer leadership ecosystem has helped us drive and sustain a lot of this momentum.
That's great. It's a great example of really broadening and deepening your engagement across your constituencies. Emily and Tim, donor advised funds are becoming a highly utilized giving vehicle, and major and mega gifts continue to play a large role in philanthropy. At the same time, we're hearing from many donors that they want to fund systemic solutions, as you mentioned, Emily. How are you seeing this desire for long-term impact showing up in your work with donors, and how is it influencing your approach?
Tim, I can take that one first if you want.
Please.
So I actually think of those things as being two sort of separate trends, right? And obviously people who give through donor advised funds for systems change, there's an intersection there. I mean, I think of donor advised funds as being a means more for tax savings, right? A donor can get the tax rebate now and figure out where to go later. I think so the cultivation from our end is still of the individual, regardless of the giving vehicle that they're using, but additional focus on working with organizations like community foundations and helping them understand the programs that we have that might be a good fit for their donors to them, right? We certainly worked with back at Texas Children's Hospital with the Greater Houston Community Foundation on their Hurricane Harvey Relief Fund. So those relationships were really important. When it comes to systems change, I think attention that I notice, right, is this desire for immediate impact. We want to see our money going to work right now and helping people who are in need, but also this longer runway of needing to invest in solutions that will take 1 to 5 to 10 years to scale and sustain. And so a lot of what we're doing in terms of fundraising for those types of solutions is how do we take a program, how do we pilot it in a community, and how do we start building into that initial pilot program that long-term sustainability plan, whether it has to do with legislation that's providing state or federal funding, or if it has to do with private sector investment that continue to grow outside of philanthropy.
Yeah, I think that's great insight. And I would just add on the donor advised funds over the last 10 years, even more, you really have experienced this proliferation of donor advised funds being used as tax savings, but also as a marker in some cases for a more sophisticated or at least more intentional approach to philanthropy. That it can at times be a more streamlined version for families to create their own family foundation without having the professional staff and the professional the legal and other structures that create the formal frame of a family foundation as we've traditionally known it. And I think it allows people to really be a little more nimble and thoughtful, but include maybe their next generation or generations in the giving process. I would also add to Emily's good point about the community foundations. Our Greater Milwaukee Foundation is an incredible beacon within the Milwaukee community, but also a great partner in ways that we can communicate with them. And they are looking for, as a representation of many of their constituents, opportunities for impact. Sometimes that's the seed funding that gets things started. Sometimes it's the mid or late term funding that helps it kind of sustain in that kind of messy middle where the wind isn't blowing either way. So I think donor advised funds are here to stay. They're an opportunity for us to really sometimes deepen our understanding as fundraising officers as to how our donors are thinking about not just giving to Marquette or to any one institution, but how they're thinking about philanthropy more broadly. And then we get to bring that back into the office and keep getting better as the best philanthropic stewards that we can be.
That's fantastic. Thank you both. Dr. Osili, anything you would add?
I would say that when we look at the landscape, I think it's important for everyone to recognize that we live in a more complex philanthropic arena. Donors can use multiple vehicles in terms of making their gifts. And often we have to understand what those different vehicles are, what their advantages are, what the constraints are. And so I'd say in addition to the rising donor expectations, this is also a time of increasing sophistication where we also as a nonprofit sector need to be both cognizant, but also ready to adapt. We mentioned donor advised funds, but also impact investing is another new avenue. And even within the type of sort of collaboration and partnerships, interest in donors in working with a nonprofit, sometimes as a collaboration. So really thinking about where things are today, but also how they're changing.
That's great. Thank you for that perspective. Now, looking at where those dollars are going, human services and education tied at 14% of giving, health came in at 10%, and religion remains the largest category at 23%. Dr. Osili, 7 and 9 recipient categories saw growth, even when adjusted for inflation. What more can you tell us what's behind that growth? And are we seeing signs of resilience moving forward or shifts in the donor landscape?
Yes, it's a great question. When we look at the data, we have been tracking these subsectors, of course, over time. What we see during times of economic downturns in particular is that donors do shift their priorities. I'll give you some examples. During the Great Recession, we saw many donors actually move towards human services, increase their giving to basic needs charities. But it also meant sometimes reducing their commitments to, say, arts organizations, or not prioritize certain elements of their philanthropic portfolios. During the pandemic, some of that shifting also took place where donors prioritized some organizations over others. This is both a challenge, of course, but as we said, since our theme is challenge and opportunity, it's also an opportunity for those organizations that perhaps are not necessarily top of mind for donors to remind donors and stakeholders of their role in communities. Arts organizations, for example, can be an engine of economic development, can help bring communities together during periods of crisis. And I think being able to engage with donors and emphasize all the different ways that they are contributing, regardless of their subsector, is important. It's also worth noting that increasingly for some donors, especially younger donors, they tend to prioritize causes. And so emphasizing the cause areas that you're working on. Education institutions can be working on food insecurity, as an example. Healthcare organizations can be tackling greener spaces and so many other overlaps. We heard a lot about the blurring of boundaries across donor types, but it's also happening in the nonprofit sector where increasingly organizations are working on multiple sets of issues. So I think this is an important time for storytelling, regardless of the subsector that you're in, connecting to donors, really making sure that they understand your mission. One lesson from the Great Recession is that organizations that navigated that crisis and weathered the storm were ones that were able to engage with donors. They didn't retreat from building those relationships. They didn't retreat from asking for support and for connecting to their mission. And so that's an important lesson as we navigate this uncharted landscape, is that building those relationships, retaining relationships, and communicating your mission and the work you do is going to be vital, regardless of your subsector.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that context and advice. Tim, speaking of resilience, education giving rebounded sharply with a 13.2% increase. What do you think is working right now in higher education fundraising, and how are you leveraging this momentum at Marquette?
Sure. I'm really pleased to see and to read the data that comes out strong for education, and certainly higher education. You know, we're part, Marquette as a Catholic Jesuit university, we're part of the Jesuit network. We're also a member of the Big East Conference, so we have some consortiums that we kind of benchmark with and learn from. What I can speak to most is what's working for Marquette, and certainly that has been a few things. One is where the funds are going. Over 40% of the funds we raised in Time to Rise, over 40% of the 800 and almost 2 million went to scholarship. So still leaning on our founding mission of providing access and affordability to a Marquette education, to take that with you. That's working for us in a continued way. We've seen that even in this next year, the first year after the campaign. If you extend past scholarship, that gets you to Marquette, but what helps you thrive at Marquette? We're seeing a lot of success in raising funds for student success funds. Think high impact practices like undergraduate research with a faculty member. It could be an experiential learning trip to New York or Chicago or the Silicon Valley, or a service trip, something that really helps them not just be at Marquette, but stay at Marquette and thrive at Marquette. So that's really helping our 91% retention rate first to second year. I think when you see some resonance with some really more sophisticated donors, they want to see, how do we work across the academic enterprise and interdisciplinary programs, interdisciplinary research in areas like water and neuroscience and energy, are certainly biological sciences, are certainly things of areas of momentum for us on the philanthropic side at Marquette. We have transformed our campus over the last 2 years. So capital projects, not like Emily said, for the sake of large gifts to be named after, a family for a wing or a building, but really to elevate and showcase the great work that takes place, the educational transformation that takes place, that we believe takes place at Marquette. Those things are all working. I would also say how we bring people together is critically important. Dr. Osili mentioned this earlier. How do we bring people, how do we stay close to donors? We have an incredible history of Marquette basketball, and it could be kind of a silly comment, but I really don't think it is. It's not only one of our most well-known ways that we gather, it's also a great way that we showcase our brand and everything else that's part of the university. So bringing people together is critically important for us, and we're doing all those things continuously forward, always trying to be nimble and adapt as best we can.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Tim. Emily, before we move to our last question, on a similarly positive point, health giving rose 5% this year and hit an all-time high. What's driving this growth in your experience, particularly in mental health?
Yeah, so I would say that the 5% increase in health giving is certainly gratifying for us, those of us who are working in that sector. I focus on mental health because that's really where I live and have for the past several years. And mental health has historically been a very small part of that, right? Historically, about 6% of health giving is going to mental health, or 2% of total philanthropic giving. But I think we are starting to see a broader public awakening to the depth and breadth of our current mental health crisis, particularly among youth. As well as a recognition that mental health is truly intersectional, right? So when you're looking at education and ensuring that K-12 and higher education students are ready to learn, or when you're looking at health systems and the recognition that bodies don't stop at the neck, there is a head attached to it, to your human services and public benefit, where addressing mental health along with so many other basic needs is important to serving the entire individual. And I think for a long time, philanthropy was perhaps a bit paralyzed when it came to mental health. This notion of, well, there aren't anything to invest in. We don't know what the solutions are. And we're finally at a point, I think, as a community to be able to say, yeah, there are solutions, right? We cite a statistic that 70 to 90% of all mental health conditions can be treated, which is a fact that's really eye-opening to a lot of donors, right? So while there's that sense of urgency and a desire to help, I think we also are navigating sort of the sense of urgency and long-termness, right? So people who want to have an immediate impact on the crisis, but also recognizing that we need systems reform. So as we're in the quiet phases of a campaign right now, and that was one of the long conversations we had, was to what degree do we lean into the urgency, why donors need to invest in mental health right now, why the opportunity is ripe, and to what degree do we really shore up, as all organizations want to, right, our long-term sustainability through endowments and reserve funds. And we're leaning really heavily into the urgency. And we think that that's the message of the moment, knowing and hoping that some of our core donors will still be there for those long-term organizational sustainability.
I hear your strong communications background in your strategy as well. Dr. Osili talked about a theme of hopefulness in American philanthropy, and that's coming through as you think about your work moving forward. In our final minutes, I would love to close with a question for all of you, which is, what is one thing you're most optimistic about looking forward, or one thing that you are committed to applying to your work based on this year's trends?
I can start because I've probably had the most time with this data. I think one thing I'm most optimistic about is the commitment of Americans to generosity. Generosity is a core value for Americans across this country. One benefit of working on this project is we get to visit so many different communities and also look at the data in a historical perspective. And through the decades, we've seen Americans really step up in times of crisis. And I think that that message is one that really resonates with me right now, because we have so many challenges, but also a reminder that in times of adversity, that is a time when generosity really matters. And working in this sector and working on the data piece of this sector is also a reminder, because we get to see that behind those data points are individuals that are stepping up, that are leaning in, that are saying, I want to help, whether that's making a donation, sometimes it's volunteering, sometimes it's advocating. So in moments like these ones, there is both a reminder that generosity is a core value. It transcends a lot of the divides that we're used to thinking about. And it's also a reminder going forward that our job is to continue to build trust with donors so that they see nonprofits and philanthropy as a place where they can make a difference.
I'll jump in next if that's okay, Tim. I would say I am most excited that we are in an age of philanthropic disruption, right? So as you heard Dr. Osili say several times, our donors are getting smarter and more sophisticated and more values driven and more focused on lasting impact. And while I think that can sometimes feel like a challenge for those of us in the field, right? The expectations when we walk into a donor meeting are ever higher. I also think that the potential for truly impactful change is possible in a way it never was before. So while that can be scary, right, for individual organizations, or depending on where they are, how great they are in the status quo, I think it's a really exciting time for us to be in philanthropy and to be able to raise funds to make the types of changes that never have been possible before.
I would just add, hard to follow both of those, but I would just add that we work in an industry that is about gratitude and impact and transformation. I'm really blessed to have been in higher ed, fundraising, philanthropy for the last 20 plus years, and I get to see the transformational impact of philanthropy. I get to see it live. We get to facilitate it, but also that duality that if it's a meaningful pursuit, if it's a mission we believe in, if we're pursuing something of excellence, it's supposed to be hard. There will always be uncertainty, discomfort, challenges. And like we've said numerous times today, how do we see those as the opportunities to get even further along, to help society through philanthropy? And I believe higher ed is one of the most powerful areas to do that.
Wow, thank you for those inspiring notes to end our conversation. Thank you all. We value your partnership and participation immensely. As a reminder, the recording from today's webinar will be distributed via email following the session. And on behalf of all of us at CCS Fundraising, the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and our presenters today, thank you so much for joining us.